In my mind, it was this sort of small town from a Western film with one road. And that's really what it ended up being. So when I first arrived in Mancos and I saw the Mancos Times building, I was immediately taken by the front of the building. It's basically a storefront.
So it was not a place that was appealing. It was a dead building.
It was just an eyesore and almost embarrassing downtown. Like, oh, it's nice down here except for that building.
Evidently, they opened up the door and he saw back there this sort of treasure trove of printing press stuff.
So my first initial reaction was, oh my God, it's so big.
Now, these were the Cadillac of presses.
I can't imagine that there are more than a handful in this country, maybe less.
Oh, I think the rediscovery of this press and the success of it has put Mancos on the map again, because we've got something that is very valuable to history.
To have an original press in an original building in the same small town is unheard of.
This program was made possible by the History Colorado State Historical Fund,
supporting projects throughout the state to preserve, protect, and interpret Colorado's architectural and archaeological treasures. History Colorado State Historical Fund. Create the future, honor the past.
with additional funding provided in memory of Deanna E. LaCamera and members like you. With special thanks to the Denver Public Library, History Colorado, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, and to these organizations.
Mancos is a quiet, unpretentious mountain town tucked in the southwest corner of Colorado. Although it is known as the gateway to Mesa Verde National Park, Mancos is largely made up of ranchers, shop owners, and artists. But one part-time resident here also just happens to be a world-class preservation expert from the University of Pennsylvania. Frank Matero was walking down Grand Avenue one day in 2013 when he noticed someone working in the old newspaper building.
And it was one of the editors for the newspaper. And she invited me in, and there was an odd sheetrock wall separating her from the rest of the building, and it didn't seem original, didn't seem right. Had a flashlight, opened the door, and I can only liken it to the descriptions of Carter first peering into Tutankhamun's tomb. The gilding on the great wheel caught my eye, and I realized it was an entirely intact print shop.
Frank is the type of person who's just curious and interested in people as much as he's interested in buildings and spaces, and just walking around the town talking to people. You know, you hear stories and you hear histories. To me, it makes total sense that Frank would be the one to find this thing.
My time in Mancos, Colorado begins in around 1992. I was asked by the National Park Service to visit Mesa Verde to consider a project. A year has not gone by that I have not been back.
He comes here whenever he can in the summer. That's obviously great for us because we all love Frank. He's a wonderful person. He's very generous. And without his dedication to this project, it certainly would not exist.
To discover these places virtually unchanged is remarkable. They have an aura to them.
The right person came along, knew what it was, knew how rare it was, and that begins then the history of what is now going to be a really interesting cultural contribution to Mancos.
And, you know, Winston Churchill's famous line, we shape our buildings and then they shape us. It was obvious to me, at least, that if we could get this building back and make it alive again, get it back into the mainstream of the Mancos citizenry, we could really do some amazing things for the town as well as for the press.
Frank had a vision of returning the newspaper building back into the center of life in Mancos, as it had originally been. If funding could be found to restore the historic property and the rare Cranston Press, this place could become a cultural hub in southwest Colorado.
A professor from the University of Pennsylvania came and addressed the Mancos Valley Chamber of Commerce and told us what he had discovered in the building and what a treasure he thought it was.
I was on the Chamber of Commerce board at the time. Frank Matero, bless his heart, basically asked if we had any idea what was in that building behind that fake wall. And we said, well, just a bunch of old junk related to printing. And he said, well, you have a rare find, a Cranston Press back there.
If the project, as he proposed it, were to go forward, it would need a group of people on the ground in Mancos that cared about it.
He said, I don't want to be the outsider coming in saying, hey, don't you know what you have here? Let me tell you what to do with it. So having someone like Frank have the curiosity and the passion and the willingness to say to a group of us in the community, I'll help you, but if you guys want to do this, you need to take ownership of it.
Frank's plan to create a community art center and print shop at 135 West Grand Avenue rested on 100-year-old wheels and rollers. Would the Cranston Press be able to run again? Frank called his colleague at Penn, who happened to be an expert on archaic printing presses, Matt Neff.
We knew that we had to have somebody that really had a solid understanding of how to work with presses. Matt understands presses.
So he was a natural for me to reach out to.
As soon as Frank talked to Matt about this printing press and said, look, is this something that you'd be interested in helping us with? Matt said yes.
Frank basically asked me if I would be willing to come out to this tiny town in Colorado and take a look at this press because it was pretty much hermetically sealed, no light. The dryness just kept everything restored in this little cave. It was like walking into a film.
When I called Matt Neff and he did a little checking, we realized that there are only 3 Cranston presses that we know of in the country.
So I was immediately impressed. I knew it was something special. I knew it wasn't just your standard kind of letterpress. So I was excited.
If the once mighty Cranston Press could run again, it would remind people of its importance in journalistic history, a time when ink on paper both informed and defined small towns in the Old West.
The Mancos Press represents the future, represents every town wanted a newspaper. And here it is. It represented stability, it represented the industrialization of the Western Slope, just getting that heavy thing to Mancos. So radios are not readily available till the late 1920s, early 1930s. In much of rural Colorado, there is no electricity until the Great Depression. News comes from newspapers. And so little communities, Newcastle, Silt, Rifle, all had their own newspapers.
The role that newspapers played in settling the West was that they became sort of the glue that held a community together and allowed it to grow. Through what a newspaper was covering, people shared their ideas and their visions for community.
So these old family newspapers in small towns were really the lifeblood of the town.
I read somewhere, did the West make the newspapers or did the newspapers make the West? Because they're so tied together.
And so the town gets plotted and laid out, and you're not really a town without a newspaper. You need a newspaper, you need a saloon, you need a church, but you really need that newspaper to bring in other people.
Well, I can only imagine what it meant for Mancos to get a newspaper in 1893, but I suspect there was a lot of cheering. It was a mark to have your own newspaper.
Mancos might have been just another frontier cow town if it weren't for 2 factors. It had a newspaper and it had a national park.
Mancos is only 7 miles from the entrance to Mesa Verde National Park. When people would catch a train into Mancos, they would then go up to the park on horseback or in a wagon. Many of the buildings in Mancos actually when you look at the dates, that coincides with Mesa Verde becoming a national park. And so truly the economic development of Mancos is inextricably woven into Mesa Verde and its development as a national park.
Mancos existed certainly before the rediscovery of Mesa Verde. It is really the first culturally significant national park in the United States. After that point, more and more visitors came to Mesa Verde, and Mancos was the staging area.
So Mesa Verde definitely puts Mancos on the map, and anything related to Mesa Verde is going to be in the Mancos newspaper.
Newspapers were so important to Western towns that even Little Mancos had 2 papers in the early 1900s. After a pair of brothers, Ira and E.J. Freeman, purchased both of them, they created the combined Mancos Times-Tribune. Local reporting was at its heart.
My uncle Ira Freeman started the paper, ran it for many, many, many years. It was definitely the local family newspaper. Everybody had their own little headline. Somebody had people over for supper. There was the little headline, guests at Mrs. Smith's house, and then she'd put a little blurb in about Mr. and Mrs. Jones went to Mr. and Mrs. Smith's house.
I mean, if you read some of these old papers, there's a little bit about World War I or something, but it's mostly about it's time to plant your corn, or Sam and Rosie went to Denver for the birth of their grandchild.
It might only be 4 pages, but it was all local. It was all about what happened in Mancos. There wasn't even any Cortez or Dolores or Durango news in the Mancos Times.
There's one woman in town now whose father was the last person to actually operate the Cranston Press and print the newspaper there.
It was really, really important for this little town to have its own paper. It's local news. National news wasn't as easy to get. So it was the local news, and that's what the people wanted.
It was that kind of a newspaper, and it really held the community together.
What I remember when I was young, it was dirty, and it was a lot of work. So my dad, Richard Patrick, was the last owner-operator of the Mancos Times when it was published in Mancos. My dad did not have a background in journalism. He wanted to be a printer, so he bought the newspaper thinking he could do that. I don't think he thought through the whole process of actually being a journalist. He learned by a lot of hard work and a lot of digging what a journalist does. Mom would be on the phone taking ads. Dad was all over the community. And when you're in a newspaper in a small town in the 1960s, you know everybody. And everybody knows you. Today you can go on the internet, you can research different topics. None of that was here. The newspaper was community. So it was a different time. It was an innocent time.
You could disagree with the editor, and you could say, no, there were 6 horses stolen, not 4. So you could correct things. But this was not fake news. This was a newspaper. This was a real product of a real time. It's a moment in time before the digital age. And to think that a printmaker has to do everything backwards and then it's reversed on the press is astounding to me.
Letterpress is a way of printing type and images that uses a relief process, which means you have an object or a piece of type or an image block, and you roll ink over the surface. When you roll ink over the surface and apply pressure, you get a print. But on the base level, it was a way that everything was printed.
The smell of the ink, the danger of all those moving hard, serious metal parts, and then the satisfaction of not only printing the paper, but folding it, having it come out the end, worried about the ink smearing.
The more you work on a press, you kind of get to know it, like it's your instrument.
Even though it's one paper at a time, it was amazing. You could publish a book.
Most books were published on letterpresses until late 19th century. So you could find books in your local library that were indeed printed on a letterpress, meaning that a human set each letter of type, one letter at a time.
The invention of letterpress and printing presses changed civilization. The letterpress had the same effect then as the internet is having now in terms of enhancing and spreading communication and education for people.
We realized that not only were we going to need to restore the press, that there was a great opportunity there, that the building itself really needed to be restored.
Well, it's a rather ordinary building, but it is precisely in its ordinariness that it is so special, because it was a great example of a type of tree building that was ubiquitous across America that are disappearing. So it was just a holdover, a survivor.
None of the board members or anybody knew anything about historical preservation.
Collectively, with others in town, we wrote a grant.
And so he guided us in that effort. And we wrote a grant to the Colorado State Historical Fund.
We ended up writing, I believe, 4 different proposals. Each time we had to refine a little bit more our proposals based on the reviewers' feedback.
If they give you funding, they want you to do it right. And if you're doing a restoration project, you're going to put it back the way it was.
Even though the nonprofit group received funding to restore the Mancos Times-Tribune building inside and out, there was still another challenge. They did not own the building they were trying to save. They had a bold plan to repurpose it as a community art center, but they didn't have the keys to the place. That hinged on a venerable news family, the Ballantines.
It is Morley Ballantine who moves to this little town in Durango to own a newspaper that was for sale. By the time the 21st century rolls around, nobody is in the newspaper business anymore except the Ballantines. And it's this little sort of outlier newspaper that is still what is now Ballantine Communication. So the Ballantine family owns the Durango Herald, the Cortez Journal, the Mancos Times, the Pine River paper. And so they fully understand their responsibilities, not only to publish, but to try and be fair about news and to do that news which is local.
The real people that made this whole thing possible are the Ballantine family members. They very generously donated the building and all the contents to us, and nothing would have really happened without that.
That really set everything in motion. And then I simply had to do what I do here, which is preservation. So we wanted to present the building as it would have looked at that time, and we wanted to show that without any invention. We studied the history of the building. We analyzed the materials. We conducted paint analysis, mortar analyses. We looked at the conditions of the timbers. We had a condition assessment done. I had a student do a whole thesis on the building of the building. The shop had been painted many times. As you could imagine, when we see the historical photos, they're in black and white. They're colorless. We have no idea what these things look like unless we do the kinds of scientific material analysis that identifies layers, colors, composition.
It's hard to imagine that people spend their lives taking paint chips and then analyzing them and trying to figure out what was the first coat of paint on the wall.
We take samples, cross-section them, and then look at them under the microscope. We do chemical analysis.
We weren't quite sure what it was going to take to get the paint off. The ceiling had been painted, and some paints require heavy strippers to get the paints off. And I said, all right, well, let me just use a little warm water to try and get the dirt off. And I just checked a corner, because you never want to do anything large because you're not sure what's going to happen. And the paint started washing off.
We have a local car wash, and we went down there and pressure washed the tin ceiling plates. And sure enough, it worked beautifully.
We clipped them to the walls that you normally would put your car mats, and then we blasted them with high-pressure water. Rather unorthodox, unconventional, but it worked. It took a lot of quarters, but we did it.
And so when people walk in and see the colors in there, they're pretty bright. We have yellow on the top of the wall and the ceiling, and we have kind of a turquoise blue on the bottom part of the wall. Those are the original colors.
But what about the rare elephant in the room? The century-old Cranston Press. Would it charge back to life or remain in a permanent slumber? It was up to Matt Neff to try to waken this long-neglected beast.
My first impression of the Cranston in the Mancos Times building was back in basically a storage room with just stuff everywhere. It was almost impossible to see the full press at one time. You know, the question was asked early on, like, can you fix this? Early on, I said, yeah, totally. We could fix it. I mean, I told them I was really confident, but, you know, inside, I wasn't sure. There were a few bumps and snags in our restoration of the press. It's kind of like taking apart a car engine and then putting it back together.
The Cranston, to get parts for it, you have to make them. There is no parts store that you can go to.
I started by kind of researching and gathering knowledge. I was trying to meet people, and I met people from all over the area, and I met Dick Patrick, who was the last press operator in that space. He came to the press, kind of walked me through his day-to-day.
Dad went down with Matt, and they were looking at the motor, and they knew that they were going to have some parts or something, and they were asking Dad about the belt because it was something you can't just buy. What do we do? How do, you know, what did you do?
Originally, it was left just like a time capsule. Everything was in its place. John Hinchman helped me to sort of clean this thing and take a lot of pictures and start taking it apart.
The cleaning process was massive, but we weren't going to give up. We were determined to get this thing running. The ink pen still had ink in it. I mean, it was still, like, they literally just sort of shut the door one day, turned out the lights, shut the door, and that was it.
When he sold the newspaper to the Browns and Cortez, he assumed that they would use the press the next week to publish the newspaper.
But the new owners of the paper were going digital. The majestic Cranston Press would be retired.
Last week that Dad published the paper would be the last week it was published in Mancos. And had he known that, he probably would have removed that ink and tried to clean up the press a little bit, but he didn't. A mistake that turned into a miracle. But because of that ink that Dad left in there, it preserved it.
He left the ink in the tray as he normally would. That's unheard of on the East Coast. It would just have been mush.
The ink that was left on those presses, the last time it was used, actually restored the rollers and the workings of the press.
Matt turned the press on to see if it would work.
All of a sudden, Matt turns this thing on, and the belt pulls, and this thing slowly starts to come to life.
And he was stunned because it worked like a charm.
There's a video that I have that I was taking on my phone that you hear me like me, oh my God. And then you see me just drop the phone because I was so excited the thing was moving. It's working.
There it is.
Oh my God, it's working.
It's working. It's working, bud. Okay, want to turn it off?
No.
The three of us kind of just sort of stepped back a little bit, like watching this thing come to life. And once it started to run and the noise coming off it, the three of us were just astounded. We're like, oh my God, this thing has such an incredible presence in this room.
When we did get it up and running, one, there was sort of this feeling of disbelief, like, what do you mean it's running? It actually can run?
If you can imagine a 5,000-pound machine moving very fast with gears and everything rolling, it's very steampunk.
The team had resurrected an historic early 20th century building and its press, but they still had to make the past relevant.
So we came to the name, the Mancos Common Press, because UPenn has what's called the Common Press, which is a printmaking shop, a letterpress shop, and they do classes and they have historic presses. And the reason they call it the Common Press is because one of Ben Franklin's inventions was called the Common Press. And so we decided to call it the Mancos Common Press, almost like it was the Common Press of the West. You've got the Common Press in Philadelphia, and then the Mancos Common Press in the West.
I hope on some level, like some, young kid goes in there and starts to learn about this press and is inspired. That changes lives and trajectories. I think it also hopefully will stand as this kind of historic symbol of a community that's constantly changing.
The Mancos Common Press is now a wonderful home for creative artists in Mancos. It's become a part of that very vigorous and lively artistic community.
It's like giving life back to the community.
So Mancos, Colorado calls itself at the intersection of art and the Old West. And I think that's epitomized by the press. So it is a rare press, and it's in its own building. I mean, that's just, I think, very exciting for the future of Mancos. And it will help define the town now in the 21st century as it did in the 19th century.
My hope is that when people hear the name Mancos, Colorado, no matter where they live, the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, don't they have a really cool historic press there? And a printmaking school and an artist in residence program. That's my hope, that Mancos can become known for this really valuable asset that we've revived from the ashes to bring back as an asset for not only our community, but our region in the world that might want to come and play with this beautiful historic press in a beautiful little town.